Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the third annual Hidradenitis Suppurativa Awareness Week Virtual Summit. I am so grateful for this being our third year because this has been a labor of love. It started out in the middle of the pandemic. A lot of things shifted for a lot of us around the world. The whole world completely stopped because of the COVID-19 virus. And so, because of that, we had to make adjustments. And one of the adjustments was creating a summit that was geared towards providing insight into what HS is and really dispelling a lot of the myths that are circulating within our community and outside of our community as well. I think that we have a increased awareness about HS, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done as far as research, as far as providing patients with viable treatment options and things of that nature. But this is what I'm doing with my organization to help push that agenda forward. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation and welcome. I also want to take the time to shout out our sponsors because our sponsors, without them, and just like without you, a lot of this would not have happened. So thank you so much for our support from Designs by Muriel, hsconnect.org, Hydraware, HS Foundation, 100 Page Journals, Dermaleave, My Magic South, the HS Foundation, Cleanse Skin Care, and Tanya Griffin's Holistic Care. Thank you so much for supporting our summit and for providing us not only with prizes, but also monetary donations and also marketing support as well. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors. Without you, none of this would have happened. So thank you. So today we will be discussing more about naturopathic medicine and how it is different from Western medicine. And then we'll be talking about some of how environmental toxins can contribute to our inflammatory response and what we can do to guard ourselves from these inflammatory responses. And then also more information about things like how what is HS, what is it not, also the definition, the different stages, because I think that's important. Not everybody knows that what HS is or what it's classified as, and I think that is information that we is viable for us to provide. Um, and we'll also be talking about some of the differences between treating sickness and then also preventative medicine and what the differences of those are as well. So we're going to get started with our conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Biscoe, for joining us.
I'm
I
thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. I am really grateful to have you on. I've wanted to have you since the first year, but I know that there has been so much going on both of our ends. But I'm so grateful that this is the year because I feel like the third time is always the charm.
Yes.
So I want to give you the space to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about who you are,
Mhm.
what you do, and your practice.
Sure. So, as Jasmine said, I am Dr. Ashley Biscoe. I am a naturopathic doctor. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what that means and what the training of a naturopathic physician or a naturopathic doctor is. But I own the Attune Functional Medicine Clinic in Colorado. I co-own that with Dr. Allison Egeland, who also is a presenter on this summit. And she's a wealth of knowledge. She's absolutely brilliant. But we have a practice where we really see people who have what we describe, they have fallen through the medical cracks. Many of them do have HS. Many of them have unexplained symptoms. They don't feel well, and doctors can't seem to find anything wrong, right? They've had the full workup, or so they've been told. Maybe some of them have even tried nutrition and lifestyle changes, and yet they're not improving and they don't know why. And so our practice is much more focused on complex chronic illness rather than general primary care. In 2018, we founded help4hs.com, which is a comprehensive online resource for people who are impacted by HS, whether they themselves have the condition, or even for friends and family and acquaintances of people that have this condition. Our goal was to explain what this condition is, what it is not. A lot of people are kind of Googling their symptoms and they don't know what they have yet. And so we've got some language on our website that we hope will help people understand what they might have. Because as many of you watching probably know, there's often a long delay in diagnosis. People are often misdiagnosed, told they have herpes or some other condition. And we want to get early diagnosis because once the inflammation gets going, it can be harder to get it under control. So the earlier we know what we're dealing with, the better. Now, in terms of, and I'll just say this, before I became a naturopathic doctor, I worked in the field of public health, specifically around health behavior and health education. So my goal was to try to understand how we can motivate people to engage in behaviors that promote their health. And that's actually served me really well in my clinical work because as you'll learn, a lot of the work that we do, it's up to the individual to kind of be the catalyst for their own healing. We are the guides, but we are showing people how they can affect real change in their own lives. But that takes, some unlearning of things, and it takes behavior change, and that's not always easy. In terms of a naturopathic doctor, and this is an important distinction here because we hear naturopath, we hear functional medicine. What does that mean? There are practitioners out there that are what we would call traditional or lay naturopaths. And generally, these are individuals who haven't had formal medical training. There are some online correspondence type of programs. It's not a traditional medical training program in the traditional sense, whereas a naturopathic physician acquires a bachelor's degree and then goes on to an accredited 4-year medical program with hands-on clinical training, just like an MD would. So naturopathic doctors earn the degree of ND. So I'm an ND, medical doctors are an MD. But naturopathic doctors in their 4 years of training, their training is to the scope of a primary care physician. And so we are trained to speak and understand the language of medicine. We can diagnose and treat. We are trained in head to toe physical examination, laboratory medicine. We understand how to order and interpret diagnostic imaging. We are trained in pharmacology. So a lot of people don't realize that naturopathic physicians or naturopathic doctors understand pharmacology and we can prescribe. Here in Colorado, we don't prescribe. That's the scope they've given us. But honestly, I get so much joy in our practice not needing medications. We do have patients that are on medications when they come to see us. And sometimes a medication is appropriate. I never want to give the impression that I'm against medication. It has a time and a place. But it's so exciting to me to see the changes and the healing that people can accomplish without even needing medications. And sometimes people are able to discontinue their medications once we get to the root of what is causing inflammation in their body, what is causing the imbalance. Functional medicine is kind of a modern spin on naturopathic medicine. It was coined probably maybe 10 or 15, maybe 20 years ago. Don't quote me on that, but it's newer. But functional medicine is not a degree per se. It is a system of patient-centered care that aims to look for the root causes of what's causing a person's health challenges. And functional medicine, it's been a gift because it has opened up the doors for more practitioners who didn't learn naturopathic philosophy in their training to be able to do additional training and help more people. So you'll see a lot of people who call themselves functional medicine practitioners that are chiropractors or medical doctors, et cetera. So I think about naturopathic medicine as kind of old school. It's that deeply rooted philosophy that the body is self-healing and self-correcting. And functional medicine is kind of a modern spin on that. And we can really take advantage of the advances in lab testing and the cutting edge science. But naturopathic medicine is very firmly rooted in science. It's based on the premise that the body is self-healing and self-correcting, and we develop sickness and symptoms when we have disturbances in what we call the foundations of health. So the foundations of health are elements that every person needs to be well. We all need clean air. We all need clean water and hydration. We all need the right nutrition. We all need to have at least some certain degree of structural integrity of our bodies. Our geography can determine our health, where we live, all of those things. And so when a patient comes to see us, we are paying attention to what their concerns are and maybe trying to find a diagnosis. But the highest goal is for us to look for these imbalances in their determinants of health and correct those so that the body can self-correct and self-heal. That's always our highest goal, is to help the body restore rather than to replace function. That was a long answer.
That was beautiful though, and that gave us, this is why I said I love her. It's 'cause
Oh.
very thorough answers, and that was a wonderful introduction. I wanted to mention again for any individuals that just joined us that the Q&A functions at the bottom. So if you have any questions that arise during this conversation, we do have a Q&A portion at the end, and we'll address your questions at that time. If you can't find the Q&A portion, please feel free to put it in the chat, and then I'll see it, or Gabrielle will forward it to me so that we can ask your question. So I want to get into our next question. Um, can we talk about what HS is and is not? I think that that is a good way to start this whole week
Yeah.
off, is clarifying though that part and that aspect.
Yeah, and this is kind of a loaded question, but the first thing I want to mention is that we now know from the research that HS is not a sweat gland disease. So the name is kind of misleading because you've got hidradenitis, right? So we think of the sweat glands, but we now know that the sweat glands are more of innocent bystanders. The research is pretty clear that this is a condition, it's an inflammatory condition that is mostly centered on the hair follicle. And so there are some genetic influences, there are environmental triggers that we'll talk about, but essentially HS is a reaction to various triggers and stimuli in a person who is genetically susceptible, but the inflammation really starts deep within the hair follicle. There's a buildup of keratin within that follicle, and as it builds, that can cause a dilation or a swelling of that follicle. That then leads to inflammation, and ultimately that follicular unit can rupture and spread to another follicular unit that can then allow bacteria and other microbes to play a role. I want to be clear that HS is not a bacterial infection. And in fact, the studies where they have taken cultures from the lesions, they have found that most of the time there is no infection. So again, you might find bacteria or other types of microbes in the skin or in the lesions, but it doesn't mean that they caused the inflammation. I see HS as an autoinflammatory, and I'll explain what that means, but it's an autoinflammatory condition centered in the hair follicle. There are a lot of influences related to the metabolism, so blood sugar and insulin balance, a lot of influences related to gut health. We know that a lot of people with HS also have Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. There is another connection with, so we talked about the gut microbiome, sorry, I have so many thoughts in my head, so I want to make sure I'm covering all my bases here. The gut microbiome, metabolism, hormones, that was the other thing I wanted to mention. So there are influences of hormones like androgen hormones, et cetera, but the metabolism, so I have a video where I talked about the role of blood sugar and insulin and how those influence androgen hormones. And then those androgen hormones can have an impact on the hair follicle and enhance that, what we call hyperkeratinization, or that overproliferation of keratin. So there's a lot of dynamics here. Some people have proposed that HS is autoimmune. I haven't seen strong evidence with that, but The difference between autoinflammatory and autoimmune relates to the different branches of our immune system. So we have something called the innate immune system, and that's our kind of our older branch. It's a very non-specific response for any kind of bacteria, fungus, that kind of thing. And then we have the adaptive immune system, which is a little bit more selective, a little bit more sophisticated and specific in what it goes after. So when someone has an autoimmune condition, for example, we can develop antibodies that attack a specific tissue of the body. When something is autoinflammatory, that means there's an imbalance or a dysregulation in the innate immune system. And so it's not that the body is attacking itself per se, but there's this kind of stirring up of the immune response that is very disordered, dysregulated, and it can just be very chronic.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk about how where there are areas that it presents in the body. I know that
Oh,
there's
yeah.
research that is talking about men um, can experience more severe forms. They can experience it in the head, the
Hmm.
back, just places that normally are typically not. Uh, that HS doesn't usually present because I know when I first learned about HS, it was localized to the armpits, the breast regions, places where
Yeah.
skin was touching skin.
Yeah.
However, I'm starting to realize from my own experience and from research that's developing, but you can get it in places where skin's not touching skin, like your
Yes.
legs, your back, the back of
Yes.
your neck, your ears. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
You can, yes. And all of those places that you just mentioned. So, yes, places like the legs, behind the knees. I've seen patients with a blend of HS and something called acne conglobata on the chest. It can be on the neck and on the face. When it presents in parts of the body that are not considered the classic skin fold areas, it's called atypical HS. And again, I think that's another reason why there's a lot of misdiagnosis. I've even seen a case report of a man that had his leg amputated and he developed HS lesions on that leg stump because of friction. So that was an interesting case report. So really any part of the body that has terminal hair follicles theoretically could develop HS. It can occur behind the ear. There is a correlation with HS and dissecting cellulitis of the scalp. Some people will develop a pilonidal sinus kind of at the base of the spine, or what we could call the gluteal cleft. I would say most common in men, I see it in the groin area. Women, more often, I see it in the underarms, but also in the groin or genital area. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I can
No, it
go more,
definitely
but
does. It definitely
yeah.
does. I wanted to get into next your practice's approach for
Hmm.
treating HS,
Yeah.
because I think that it's very unique, and it also could provide some insight for some patients on here who might feel stuck and don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to take biologics or any of the other antibiotics that are available, topical or internal, or go through major surgery. What
Yeah.
are some things that your practice does to help manage these symptoms that HS patients experience?
Yes. So this might surprise some of you, but honestly, when a patient comes to our clinic, we're kind of looking for the same things. And that's not to say that we don't individualize a person's care, because we do. But this goes back to the naturopathic philosophy that there are some very strong standing root causes that can apply to any person. And so we're always looking for those. So when a person comes to our clinic, they're completing a very in-depth health questionnaire. We even want to know, hey, did your mom have any birth complications with you? Were you breastfed? All of those predetermining factors can set the stage for your current state of health as it is today. We are looking at your nutritional status. So we like to look for nutritional deficiencies because those are the building blocks and the catalysts of the body. If you are deficient in vitamin D, that causes dysregulation of the immune system. If you're deficient in zinc, the skin cannot repair. Same thing with vitamin C. And so we're looking for things like nutritional deficiencies. One thing that I will say, and Dr. Eglin probably talked about this, but we have virtually seen a 100% correlation with fungus and HS in our practice. And that could be either intestinal yeast overgrowth or candida, but also toxic environmental mold. There's a very huge correlation there that we're seeing across the board. And so anytime a person comes to see me and they are presenting with HS, I'm definitely ordering lab work to see if they have elevated levels of yeast in their body. I also want to know what their mindset is and where their heart is, because I've also seen that a lot of the patients that I've had a hard time helping were the ones who had been so disappointed, so discouraged, so let down by previous interventions, or they were, they had words of defeat or hopelessness spoken to them by doctors. The words of doctors are very authoritative, and we have to be so careful what we say to the person sitting in front of us. We took an oath to do no harm, and we can do harm with our words. And I've seen firsthand people with HS who have been given doom and gloom, either the diagnosis or the prognosis of how their course is going to go. And so if that applies to you and you're watching this, I just would encourage you to not let someone place limiting beliefs over your life, because the very people who've been told, oh, you're going to keep getting worse, or that won't go away without surgery, it's not true. It doesn't have to be true for you, even if you've been disappointed before. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do know that the body is so dynamic and so designed towards life and self-healing and self-correcting. We just have to figure out what's getting in its way. We also look a lot at gut health in our practice. So there is something called the gut-skin axis, which is a bidirectional, communication. So whatever's happening in the gut can manifest in the skin. In my younger days, I had really bad cystic acne and my gut was a mess. And it wasn't until I got to the root of my gut issues that my skin was able to clear up. We also harp heavily on reducing your exposure to environmental toxins. And I will say this, and this is kind of a bold statement, but I would say more often than not, when someone has tried the naturopathic approach or they've done, functional medicine and they haven't gotten far, I can almost guarantee that they have not been worked up for toxins or infections or hidden traumas. That's another discussion. But the big ones are the infections and the toxins. And so it's not enough to just take some vitamins. That can be supportive in the short run, but if you really want to see a transformation, you've got to remove these obstacles, these triggers. And I'm excited to talk more about the environmental piece, but we're looking at the totality of a person, how they live, what is surrounding them, right? Because it's not always what we're doing or not doing. It's like, what's in your environment? Is your house moldy? Are you slathering toxic chemicals on your body every day? Are you feeling hopeless because somebody said something, hurtful to you? And we need to work on that emotional piece. So you as a person, you're not just your body. You have a spirit and all of those elements. That's why I love the journal that you're giving away. I was like, yes, you have to keep the optimism going, even in the face of defeat, perceived defeat, I should say.
Absolutely. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned gut skin access. Excuse
Mhm.
me.
No worries.
Pardon me. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the gut skin access because the question that came up for me was, has there been any studies about the specific bacteria that causes cysts and boils to pop up in the body. Is that something that can be identified?
There have been studies done, and I've read so many studies on HS. I probably couldn't even name them off the top of my head, but you do see a lot of the common, what we call commensal bacteria that naturally live on our skin. So there can always be strep and staph, that kind of thing. There can be, P. acnes type of bacteria. But I will say, based on the work that I've done over the years and looking at hundreds of lab reports and making correlations, there are certain types of bacteria called gram-negative bacteria, and they fall under different genus and species. But when a bacteria is gram-negative, that means that they have a toxin on their outer membrane called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, and that is very toxic and inflammatory. So, for example, if some of you watching, you may have heard of something called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We can have these imbalances in our gut bacteria, and certain toxins cultivate the growth of pathogenic or potentially pathogenic bacteria, and they kill off our good bacteria. But if you've got a lot of bacteria in your body and they have this LPS, or lipopolysaccharide toxin on the outside, that is very toxic and inflammatory to the body. There's a link with LPS and acne. There's a link with LPS and endometriosis. If you've ever heard of someone going septic, like in the hospital, that means that the bacteria has overwhelmed their bloodstream, but it's really the toxin, the LPS on that bacteria, which is deadly. And so when looking at the gut microbiome, I think about, is it a gram-negative bacteria? Also, certain types of bacteria like Clostridia are uniquely toxic. Strep and staph can, this is specifically within the gut, they like to eat starches and carbohydrates and give off, toxins and gases as a byproduct, including lactic acid. So there's this whole dynamic of different types of bacteria. And on the comprehensive stool panels that we use in our practice, we can even look for certain types of bacteria that can be potential autoimmune triggers. So there's this huge interaction with the gut microbiome and the immune system. Most of our immune system lives in our gut. We've got a massive lymphatic tissue right behind the gut wall, and that helps with food tolerance. That helps with the training of our immune cells to be able to recognize self versus something foreign. So the gut skin connection is so strong, and there are just so many papers published on it. And it's something that we see in real time when we're working with patients in practice.
Absolutely. Now I kind of want to get into exactly what we are here for. I mean, including the stuff we talked about previously. But I'm really excited to talk about the environmental toxins because I haven't seen a lot of community conversation around it. So I'd
Mhm.
really love to get into how environmental toxins influence our immune system response.
Yes. Oh, this is such a loaded topic, and I love it. I can geek out on this stuff. But so first, I want to say toxins are everywhere around us. I think when most people hear toxins, they think about the cleaning supplies under their kitchen cabinet. Maybe you've got the child-proof locks on, that kind of thing, or you think about like industrial waste dumping. And all of those things are true, but toxins are all around us because they are persistent in the environment, and many of them are constantly released and they don't break down. So we've got particulate matter in the air. We've got heavy metals and pharmaceutical residue and herbicide residue and pesticides in our water. Our food has a lot of contaminants. I mentioned cleaning supplies, cosmetics, personal care products. These things are all around us, and so we're never going to avoid them specifically. But what we do know is that these chemicals are very inflammatory. They can shift and dysregulate the immune system. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. They can be directly toxic to certain types of immune cells. They can shift our immune cells to express different types of pro-inflammatory proteins. They can even alter, these chemicals can actually disrupt our circadian rhythms. So we have a circadian clock. Every tissue in the body has like little circadian clocks that are in sync with our light and dark cycles. But when we are not in sync with our circadian cycles, that dysregulates the immune system. And so because these chemicals can disrupt our circadian clock, that disrupted circadian clock then disrupts the immune system. Another mechanism is that these chemicals, and these chemicals are often referred to as EDCs, or endocrine disrupting chemicals. Some of them are also called POPs, which is persistent organic pollutants. I like EDCs because I think that covers a broad base of what they do. But these endocrine disrupting chemicals can also disrupt our blood sugar and insulin balance. And whenever we have a disturbance in our blood sugar and insulin, that then dysregulates the immune system. And so everything is like interwoven. But then again, if you have a dysregulation in the immune system, that hurts blood sugar and insulin. So it's so dynamic. And with HS in particular, this is really important because I mentioned earlier, there are sex hormone influences to this condition. There are metabolic influences to this condition. And I think this is probably a root of frustration for a lot of people because they're like, I tried this diet and I stopped doing this, but nothing is changing. But, one of the foundational principles that we say at our clinic is that home is not just where the heart is. So we have to look at what's in our home environment. I use that to just kind of capture the environment in general, but everyday things in your home could be sabotaging the healing response that your body is trying to get back in line with. And so if we've got these chemicals in our environment that really confuse the immune system, I mean, that's kind of the definition of inflammation or autoinflammation, is this imbalance, this dysregulation.
Absolutely. And what should patients look out for when it comes to environmental toxins? I know that we talked about
Mhm,
some industrial chemicals, some chemicals inside the house. I know
mhm,
that I was reading information. Saw a documentary that actually, other patients might be interested in, called Not So Pretty, on
mhm.
HBO Max. It's very informative. It's about exactly what we're talking about, but it's not related to HS. It's related to the body in general. But they were speaking about some of the chemicals even in the packaging. So you could
Yes.
have an organic substance or something that is healthy, but is in a toxic container. So can we talk a little bit about some of uh, those things that patients should look out for and why?
Yes, goodness. So you mentioned food packaging. A perfect example is the toxic chemical styrene, which is found in styrofoam. And styrene has been linked to kidney problems, neurological problems. In general, these chemicals are linked to a lot of reproductive problems, all sorts of cancers. So it's not possible for most people to, never do takeout or never have food packaging. But as much as possible, at least at home, if you're cooking, you want to try and use glass food storage versus styrofoam, or even paper storage can have plastic-like or wax-like coatings. So think about the to-go cups, coffee cups, maybe bring your own mug. Those are some things you can do. This is a very in-depth topic, and I'll just let you know, I'm going to share some resources with you guys. We have some wonderful handouts that we want to share with you guys so that you can have something to take away with practical steps and things to look out for, because truly there are so many exposures and so many, there's thousands of chemicals. It's like, how would you ever know how to do your best to avoid all of them? But just at a high level, think about, glass food storage. When it comes to personal care, one of the biggest pet peeves of mine is fragrance. And I was the kid that grew up with the Bath and Body Works. You know, when I had my first apartment, I loved the wallflowers and all the sprays, but those are fragrance is a huge endocrine disruptor. And the reason that the fragrance sticks around is because they're usually made with what's something called phthalate chemicals. And phthalates are plasticizers that make plastics more flexible, but they also make sense, kind of stick to us and linger. And so when you're spraying the perfume or the cologne, or think about fabric softener and dryer sheets, those sticky phthalate molecules are getting absorbed into your skin. We can also breathe them in. And they're some of the most toxic classes of chemicals. They're highly linked with infertility and breast cancer. You name it. And so again, whenever these chemicals are getting in our body, we absorb them through our skin, we eat them in our food, we can inhale them, but there are things that you can do, simple swaps with the products that you use in your home to reduce your exposure. And over time, your body will help to release some of these chemicals. It's not as easy as, because we didn't evolve with these chemicals. So it's more it's a higher strain on the body to have to try and figure out what to do with these man-made chemicals that we've never seen before. But you can do things to support detoxification. And honestly, the first step, they've done studies where when someone switches to an all organic diet, or they switch the personal care products they're using, you can see reductions in the urinary levels of these toxins. You can see like 80% reduction in 3 days. I mean, that's fast. So we're never going to completely avoid them, but the goal is to reduce the amount that you're exposed to as much as possible.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important to mention too, and you can confirm or deny this, but um, when I first took on a lot of this information, I was overwhelmed because it
Yes.
comes with a lot of financial investment. And I don't want to skip past that because not everyone on this Zoom or not every person with HS has access to a wealth of money. And a lot of individuals in the community are economically disadvantaged. So
Mhm.
I want to say that one of the things that I've done is gotten things gradually. So for an example, I just got some bamboo olive oil covered utensils for my apartment instead of the metal ones and the plastic ones. So I tossed
Mhm.
those out and I got them from Aldi. I didn't get them from some expensive store.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but it said it was sustainably sourced. And I know that sometimes can be a buzzword, but it looked like it was something that would be okay for me to use. And
Mhm.
so it's things like that. It's those small little things. If you can do
Mhm.
something once a month, even once a year, if you can only say afford to get organic apples and everything else is non-organic, do
Mhm.
that. If you can't afford to do anything right now, that is also okay because unfortunately, the way that our world is constructed, especially right now in the middle of inflation and almost of a recession, we have a lot of financial struggles and difficulties. I'm feeling it, everyone is feeling it. So please be patient with yourself and do what you can. Don't beat yourself up about it because it's a journey. It's not a race, it's a marathon. It takes time to get to those places of being able to create an environment where we are healing and we are not contributing to our own inflammation or sickness. So I don't know if you want to confirm or deny that, but
Yes.
that was
Oh,
my
I confirm 100%. And I love that you said that because that was my journey too. Um, people might look at me and think, oh, she does everything. I am far from perfect. We are all flawed humans. And when I first learned about environmental medicine going through naturopathic medical school, it was so overwhelming. And I felt doomed. I'm like, we're all going to die. The earth is polluted, but it doesn't have to be that way. And you don't have to do everything. You don't have to do the changes that you make all at once. I love that you said, even if you do buy one thing organic, like I have kind of a rule, strawberries are like the most heavily sprayed. I think the average strawberry has like 22 toxic chemicals on it. So it's like, as a rule of thumb, if I buy nothing else organic, I'll at least just buy strawberries that are organic. I don't eat all of my food organic. It's not always possible or practical. Um, it took me many years to build up the courage to invest in an air purifier. It was expensive, even for me. It felt like a lot. So these are gradual. And I just found a natural deodorant. I've tried so many over the years, but even in my early years of practice, I hadn't fully converted to a good natural deodorant because I'm like, well, I don't want to smell, around the clinic. And I finally found one that was effective. So little by little, it is a process to change out what you're using. And one little thing, in fact, one of the handouts that we'll be sharing, and Jasmine, you'll share how they can get that. It's a guide to like detox your home room by room. And so there's little checkpoints in the kitchen and in the bedroom and things you can do over time. Yes, in this current economic climate, it feels hard. It's like, what do you do? And yet, I also want to lovingly point out the flip side, that you as a human being are so valuable, and your health is such an asset. And when you are able to purchase something that's going to support your health, really see it as an investment, because it's going to pay off in the future by hopefully avoiding, consequences down the road. And so that's kind of how you have to see it, is that you're investing in yourself, not as an expense, even though it feels expensive.
Absolutely. One of our attendees asked what the name of the deodorant
Oh,
is.
yes. So our patient coordinator, Kasha, got me onto this. It's the Ella Loose clean deodorant. It's if I type it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Ella Loose clean deodorant.
And then
Yeah.
there's also the Mama IU. I love the Mama IU as well on gel. She is brilliant. She creates natural deodorant as well,
Oh,
specifically for
wonderful.
HS patients. Her whole brand is, and so I'll put that in the chat too,
Yes.
so that you all can try that as well.
Mhm.
And I wanted to get into, I feel like this next question is sort of segueing from our previous question, which is about the belief system. We talked about it
Yeah.
earlier. How important is our belief system when seeking treatment, and does this influence our healing outcomes, and why?
Yeah. It is so powerful because, I mean, if you think about it, if you don't believe that you can get well or that anything can improve, you won't even take the step of seeking answers, because so everything starts with belief. But also, the brain controls the autonomic nervous system, I should say, orchestrates a lot of our healing response. But if you've got these hardwired beliefs that nothing will change, or I'll never get well, or nothing could ever be better, that alters how your brain is going to orchestrate that healing response. It kind of ignores healing activities. um, Even the Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. It's like this is not woo woo. Dr. Caroline Leaf, who studies the brain and how that affects our healing and how it connects with spirituality, she's even talked about how negative thoughts are literal toxins. And so when we have negative thinking, the body responds as if we've been assaulted with a virus or a toxic chemical. It stimulates a cortisol stress response, puts you in fight or flight, which is the opposite of the healing response. And so I know that there's so much despair and discouragement. I can't say that I know, because I don't have HS, so I will never say that I know, but I certainly try to understand. And I can only walk with you and hold your hand. But what I will tell you is that you don't have to see, it's the Martin Luther King quote, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just take the first step in faith. You just have to believe that something can be different. Because I'm telling you, the people that we see at our clinic, whether they have HS or Behcet's or something else. They've been told by the conventional system, this will get worse. You have to do X, Y, and Z, or nothing's going to change. And that's just not true. Don't ever let someone speak defeat over your life. They are not. They're not the author of your life. You decide what you're going to believe and how you're going to move forward. So that's my little soapbox.
Yes, I love spirituality meshed with medicine, like because I think they go hand in hand. So I love that
Yes.
you were talking about that because the mindset is so hard to get in order. I still struggle with it, and this is just speaking from a patient perspective.
Yeah.
As much as I do in the community, as much as I've grown, I still have my moments. Let my mom and my dad tell it that are very, 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 very difficult. And there's some days it's very hard to get out of bed even. My thoughts are not positive and I'm not looking to have any positivity, and I
Yep.
hold space for that. But I
Good.
also lean onto the individuals that I have in my life as my pillars so that they can help me to not necessarily get out of it, but to feel my feelings, work through it, and then so I can move into a space where I can start healing emotionally. So
Yes.
I don't think it's about dismissing our feelings.
No.
It's really about addressing them and then saying, okay, this is where I'm at and this is where I would like to be, you know?
Yes.
And it'll take time. It may happen in a day. It may happen in that next minute or the next hour. It may take a year. Who knows how long it'll take, but please continue on the journey. The emotional journey is very important to healing with HS from my personal experience. And it's not linear, so it'll go up and down like a roller coaster, and you'll just have to be on for the ride, but love yourself through it as much as possible. And I don't mean that in like a frou-frou way. I mean that in a very practical way.
Yes.
So yeah.
I love that. And I love that you said holding space for like not wanting to be positive. I think there is a trend of toxic positivity where it's like, nope, everything's great. And that's not true. Like sometimes things suck and that's okay. You have to honor that. I certainly don't want someone stewing or dwelling in that. And like you said, lean on your pillars. One of the things we teach in our online program is finding your why. What is getting you out of bed in the morning? There's a great book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And he's a plastic surgeon who recognized that he had a subgroup of patients that healed really fast after surgery. He called them his rapid healers. And he said, what singled them out is that they all had a compelling reason to get better quickly. They all said, I got to get back to this, or, oh, I got to finish that project. They had something to do, something to look forward to. And so we have to be very careful about not losing sight of our purpose, or at least figuring out what your purpose is, because you get more life when you identify a need for more life. And that actually has literal physical healing for the body. So Jasmine, the work that you do is so important. And on days that you don't feel like going, there's probably a seed in your heart that is like, you know what? I'm here to serve people. And that lights me up. Like, it's not just about you. You have such a big why, and you're affecting probably millions of lives. And when we focus on why we want to be well, why we want to be functional during the day, and on the flip side, that's something to consider too, right? If you're stuck in your healing journey, are you finding sources of joy? Are you finding ways to love yourself, to love others? I had a patient a couple of years ago that had a lot of fatigue, and we did all the right physical stuff. We addressed her thyroid, we did all the infection stuff, and she's like, I'm still so exhausted in the morning. And I had this impression in my heart, and I just looked at her and I said, are you even excited to start your days, or do you dread your days? And it turned out she hated her job. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with her body. She was dreading her days because she hated her job. And so sometimes it's not always a physical disturbance. We can absolutely have social or emotional disturbances that are affecting our physical body, our energy, our symptoms, whatever that is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we get into the Q&A, because we have a few questions
Good.
that I want to get through from our attendees, can we briefly go over so I just want to lay out some bullet points from what we talked about today, and just do like just a brief summation of kind of what we talked about, and like some key takeaways that you feel like are important out of everything that we talked about. And then also, attendees, let us know how you're enjoying the conversation. If you're getting what you need, if you've learned some new things, let us know, while Dr. Biscoe kind of goes over an overview of what we discussed today.
Yeah, so if I could give my perfect high level overview, what I want you to know is that your body was made to be self healing and self correcting. That's the default. That's why if you cut your hand, you don't have to tell it to heal. You don't have to do anything, it just heals. That's the natural order of things. And what we have to do in order to be well is to make sure that we have all of the foundational pillars in place so that the body has what it needs to do that self correction. And we also need to remove anything like toxins or infections or negative emotions or toxic jobs that are getting in the way of that healing. And so it's just a matter of supporting you as a whole person. Environmental toxins are an often overlooked part of a person's healing journey. If you think of your body as a bucket, right, the more filled it is with stressors, whether that's nutrient deficiencies, emotional stress, infections, and chemicals, when your bucket is full and it's spilling over, that's when we're at the height of symptoms, at the height of inflammation. And depending on your individual genetics or what you've been through in life, you might have a really big bucket where you can hold a lot, or you might have a tiny little teacup where your capacity is a lot smaller. Everyone is different. And so just being mindful of just honing in on toxins in particular, there are things that we can do in our everyday life to reduce our exposure so that our buckets aren't so full all the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that overview.
Of
I
course.
I do want to get into our Q&A. So if you do have to leave, don't worry. This session is recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Tomorrow we do have an exciting session, this day 2. It's starting at the same time as it did today, 4 p.m. PST, 7 p.m. EST. And it is with Sarah Nunez, and it's how to utilize plant medicine to manage symptoms externally. We are learning we're going to even have a live salve demonstration so that you can take some simple household ingredients and create a salve just for you. I am going to get into the Q&A because I know that everyone has amazing questions to ask.
I hope I have
Um,
answers.
Yes. So an anonymous attendee asked, well, they said, I've been told by my doctor that surgery can cure HS. So I want to know, they want to know if that's true. And before we get into that, I want to say that there's no cure at all for HS. Cure means that it's completely eradicated from the body. It will not come back. That is not what happens with HS. You can manage the symptoms, sorry, and then also you can treat and then also be in remission, but cures do not exist for HS. So I'll pass it to Dr. Biscoe to continue on that conversation.
Yes, and just, piggybacking off of what you said in terms of remission, that's our highest goal, is to get really long periods of remission if possible. I have one patient in particular, and I think she's been without a flare for going on 4 years now, which is really exciting. That's, I think, an incredible milestone. But I will say surgery is not always curative. And by that, as Jasmine said, we don't know that there is a cure. There might be a cure out there that we'll discover someday. But right now, the goal is the highest level of management. I would say out of our patients who have had surgery, like before coming to see us, they've all had recurrences of flares, often in different parts of the body. And I just will say, in naturopathic philosophy, we have a reason for that, because when we see a symptom of any condition, that is an indicator of an underlying imbalance. And so if you just suppress that by removing that affected part, you haven't done anything to address the root. And so your body's going to get your attention in some other way. That fire was never put out, it can manifest somewhere else. And so it's wonderful if a person can have surgery and get relief, from that. Some people have long periods of remission after surgery, and they might not have, a recurrence, but even in the medical literature, it's pretty clear, and based on what we've seen in our patient population, surgery is not a guarantee.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Tony Wilson asked, how can we control inflammation or gut health? And I know we talked a little bit about this,
Yeah,
but maybe we can briefly answer this question again.
yeah. Inflammation comes from a lot of different sources. And so one of the things we walk you through in our clinic programs and through our online programs is hitting on all of the elements that contribute to inflammation. So we talked about negative thoughts, but also the way you sleep, the way you honor your circadian rhythm. So having bright lights on at night, believe it or not, that causes inflammation. When it comes to gut health, things like sugar and refined vegetable oils are very bad for gut health. If you have underlying infections in your gut, and that can happen for a lot of reasons, it's harder to heal the gut while those microbes are there continuing to cause trouble. Certain medications can cause gut disruption. Artificial food coloring and food flavors cause gut disruption. So there are so many things that disrupt the gut, and anything that disrupts the gut will cause systemic inflammation, because the gut is literally the gateway to the rest of your body. I'm trying to think if there are any other top tips I would want someone to know. Stay away from fragrance. That's always my soapbox. Sugar, vegetable oil, wheat is very inflammatory. We've seen, not just because it can really spike blood sugar. Wheat has a unique type of starch that can really spike blood sugar, and that can lead to inflammation. But a lot of wheat is sprayed with glyphosate, which is kind of the Roundup type of chemical. And I was just at the home improvement store, and they have it everywhere. That's very toxic. And so that is a really significant gut disruptor. And it can actually shift the composition of microbes in your gut towards an inflammatory picture. That, I hope that answers some of your question. It's a great question, but it's just so detailed. There's so many things that cause inflammation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for answering that.
Sure.
I was also wondering, instead of fragrance, what if patients want to
Oh,
smell nice? What can they use?
yes.
Are essential oils, are there other suggestions? Because I know that I Googled non-toxic fragrances
Yes.
recently. I won't disclose
Yeah.
too. So what would be?
Honest, yeah, honestly, to my knowledge, essential oils are kind of the best go-to. I don't wear fragrance anymore, but I am aware of some companies that have made essential oil-based perfumes. If you can get like a pure, like jasmine oil, or even, I love the smell of lilac or rose. If you're a male, maybe something like sandalwood could give you kind of or just someone who prefers a more masculine scent, like a sandalwood. I think there are a lot of options out there.
Absolutely. Um, so Kelsey Cratch, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. My apology if not, but Kelsey asked, is the link of HS, auto-inflammatory disease, is there a link between HS, auto-inflammatory disease, and trauma? So I think this goes into something we discussed it actually in the documentary, which is epigenetics,
Mhm.
and talking about those genetic triggering the genetics that might be in our system. So can we kind of talk a little bit about that
Yes.
trauma that might contribute to inflammatory responses in the body?
Yes. And this is not my main area of expertise, but I will tell you, we ask every patient if they've had traumatic events. And trauma is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope. right, in that moment. And so some people have had trauma with a big T, like a sexual assault, or a divorce can be a big trauma. Other people can have ongoing traumas with a little T, so just daily stress, or having an annoying neighbor. I don't know, a job that you hate. So each person defines trauma differently, but I will tell you, across the board, unresolved trauma can be a cause of sickness and a hindrance to healing, because what happens is that trauma can dysregulate and even change the architecture of the brain, and that changes how the autonomic nervous system can do its healing work and orchestrate that healing response. And so absolutely there's a link between trauma, I would say any kind of sickness, and that can even be transgenerational. Trauma from your grandmother can be passed down to you from an epigenetic standpoint. They've done research where they took either mice or rats, and they shocked these poor creatures while they exposed them to the scent of cherry blossoms. And then the offspring of those mice had the same fear response to being shocked just from smelling cherry blossoms, even though they had never been around cherry blossoms before. So we know, and Dr. Caroline Leaf, I really love her work. She talks a lot about the trauma response and how the neural wiring of the brain can impact our diseases that manifest. There's also a great book called The Body Keeps the Score, and that's about how hidden traumas can get buried in our physical body, and that has to be released, processed, healed, in order to allow healing to take place. I don't know of any trauma HS linked specifically, but again, any health condition can be linked with trauma. And I believe, and I've talked about this with a friend of mine who has HS, I believe just getting a diagnosis and living with HS is a form of trauma for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Someone asked, it was anonymous attendee asked, also, can someone with HS undergo liposuction? I think that's an interesting question because some patients might be interested in cosmetic surgery and might be afraid to undergo it because
Mhm.
they're not sure if another HS lesion will pop up or if something will go awry. Do you know enough information about that to address that question?
Well, I, could you undergo liposuction? Yes. I would be mindful and careful, because from what we know about people with HS, they tend to have a more fragile, what's called the basement membrane in the skin, which is kind of the deepest layers of the skin that holds everything together. And so I do worry about just kind of having a predisposition to possibly an altered wound healing response. Um, I'm probably a little bit biased. And again, I'm not judging why you want to have liposuction. I just, I've seen that any kind of high force intervention on the body can be a source of physical trauma. It can be very hard on the body. And so I'm a little bit more cautious of any kind of surgery that isn't like medically necessary. Or, and again, maybe it is. I don't know your story, so I'm not going to judge and say that the liposuction wouldn't be medically necessary. I would speak with your surgeon, because if you have a good surgeon, he or she should be able to explain and understand, based on any pre-existing conditions you have, are there risks? For example, I was emailing with a sweet girl on our email list recently, and she was asking about eye surgery. And people with HS do have to be more careful about types of eye surgeries, because there's something about the collagen connection. There could be a greater risk of scarring, which is interesting. I didn't know that, and my dad was an eye surgeon. But there can be an increased risk of scarring just based on how the tissues might be affected differently. So sometimes there are a lot of nuances, um, to understanding how different types of conditions or predispositions might be connected, and then what are the associated risks with that.
Absolutely. Marcy asked, is there any way to get rid of a lesion that refuses to heal? They have one on their thigh, a growing crease that the dermatologist cut out the cyst, but it keeps opening back up. Is there any way to fix
Mm.
this? It's actually the only one that they have currently.
Yeah, so the cyst was removed, and it sounds like if it's opening up, it sounds like the wound won't heal.
Yeah, it keeps
Yeah,
opening even though
yeah.
they removed the area.
Well, the first thing I would think of is the location, because if it keeps opening back up, I do wonder if body movements are putting more tension on that area and not allowing it to have enough closure. So that's something that I would, maybe talk to your doctor and see. They might be able to recommend like a butterfly closure that can kind of keep it, you know, enclosed for a while. Other than that, my favorite wound healing products are the Manuka Med. Some of you might have heard me talk about that before, but we really have seen them expedite wound healing. Even my 90-year-old grandma that had an infected elbow replacement, and they were really concerned, it turned things around. So I've seen it heal things that just were not healing. And it really helps to lay down healthy new tissue in a rapid manner. But that's something to consider. Sometimes it's not that there's something wrong with your body or wrong with that wound. It could just be the location of it. And perhaps it keeps getting pulled a little bit and it just needs an opportunity to be a little bit more protected.
Absolutely. Um, What are your thoughts on the AIP diet? And I
Oh,
love that this next question, just because I know that you all have Help for HS, which you
yeah.
go into a lot of the dietary and inflammatory foods that can also can trigger patients. Not everybody, and not every patient is triggered by food,
Yep.
but the ones that are, the IEP diet can sometimes be helpful. So can we kind of talk about what that diet is and what it entails?
Yeah. So the AIP diet, or the autoimmune paleo diet, um, came about after several people working in the paleo type diet community started connecting some dots. And I feel like Dr. Sarah Ballantyne kind of put the final criteria around this diet. So I'll give her credit. But essentially, the AIP diet is meant to exclude what are thought to be the most inflammatory foods and the foods that are most likely to cause disruption of the gut lining, which would then cause inflammation and be a catalyst for autoimmune conditions, or just really any inflammatory conditions. So it's refined sugar free, it's grain free, egg free, dairy free. It's a pretty restrictive diet, and it's not meant to be a forever diet. It's meant to quickly drop levels of inflammation to let your immune system calm down so that you can get quick relief and kind of speed up the healing process. Give your body an opportunity to allow that gut lining to heal. We do use the AIP diet in our practice for certain individuals, and sometimes we modify it. I think diets are templates. They're not always meant to be laws, and we have to be very careful of that and what our intention is with any diet, because as Jasmine said, it doesn't work for everyone. And sometimes there are different reasons why. If your gut's not healthy, you could have a food allergy to lettuce or raspberries. And I've seen that before. So just because something is a clean food doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for you. But going back to the AIP, I think it's really helpful. Some of our patients have seen really good results with it. I always like to give pros and cons to what I'm recommending. And so the pros of the AIP diet is that it does have a good success rate. Some of the cons, though, is that it does allow a lot of starches that are considered safe starches. So you can do a lot of tapioca, cassava, sweet potato, things like that. And there's nothing that's inherently wrong with those foods. But for people with HS, and even in our Nourish cookbook, we use those ingredients in very limited quantities because you don't want to spike blood sugar. So you have to be very careful if you're following an AIP diet. Don't go crazy on like AIP desserts made with, tapioca flour, because that gets metabolized into sugar. And if you happen to have a lot of bacterial or fungal imbalance in your gut, Sometimes those starches can be problematic in that regard. So it can take a lot of customizing to make something work really well. I've also seen really good results with the specific carbohydrate diet. That's something we teach in our program as well. And that was designed for really inflammatory bowel disease and also celiac disease. But that diet is also grain-free and it really allows the gut to heal. And so that's another one of my favorite tools.
So Shanna says, I think it's not easy to find a naturopathic doctor for most of us. What would you recommend that they do outside of intentionally advocating for their own health and trying to find practitioners who don't buy into, I'm guessing, the traditional um,
Sure.
medicine?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say that it can be helpful to have a doctor, a naturopathic doctor or a holistic practitioner that does understand the appropriate place of conventional medicine, because sometimes that is the most appropriate thing to do in addition to the holistic care. So I just want to make that clear that conventional care is not always bad. And I want to say you'd be surprised how many naturopathic doctors are out there. If you go to the website of, so if you go to naturopathic.org, which is the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians, some of us, I'm no longer a member, but there are people who pay to be members and you can find their listing. Other ways to find a good naturopathic doctor, and again, we have them in most states. Just do a Google search for naturopathic doctor. You want to make sure, however, that they graduated from an accredited naturopathic medical school. And you can find, I'm going to put this in the chat box. You can find a list of those schools on the website. It's called the Council for Naturopathic Medical Education, or the CNME. That's a mouthful, but that will ensure that they actually went to an accredited 4-year medical program, because there are a lot of practitioners that say they're a naturopath or a naturopathic doctor, but they have very limited training and they can't diagnose, and they don't have all the understandings of pathology and things like that. So the Council for Naturopathic Medical Education, if you find a practitioner who says they're a naturopathic doctor, just make sure they've graduated from one of the programs listed on that website. But I think we have naturopathic doctors in all 50 states. There are fewer in certain states. I don't know that we have any in Oklahoma, but we have them in Illinois. We have tons of naturopathic doctors on the West Coast and East Coast, Arizona. We do telehealth in most states. So yeah, I hope that you can find a supportive practitioner out there. I think I'm biased, of course, but naturopathic doctors are incredible human beings, and we're a very kind-hearted profession, and most of us got into this work because we had our own health drama and we found a better way.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for asking these questions. Would you mind putting in the chat where patients might be able to reach out to you if they have any questions?
Absolutely.
And while
So
you're on that, oh, go ahead.
yeah, so our clinic website is attunemed.com. Also check out our help4hs.com. And we've taken our clinic program and put it into an online program, which we're so excited about. And you guys can even get a free preview of our toxin module. That's what we wanted to share with you guys, all the handouts for how to find, how to avoid chemicals in your environment, detox your home. So you can get that if you go to it's called Body Bliss. And you can register if you want to buy the program, you can, but we're giving away the whole module on obstacles to healing, which covers the toxins, all of that. It's my favorite module. And so that's our gift to you.
Thank you so much. And we will see you tomorrow. And we appreciate you so much. All right. Bye, everyone.